Good morning, everybody. From greetings from the Netherlands. Here it's 9:30 in the morning. I hope you have grabbed a coffee and to join our panel discussion and an interview about gender equality strategies for success in the private sector. My name is Amelia Lopez and I'm the Senior Gender Equality Advisor for the Global Compact Netherlands. I'm as well the facilitator of the Target Gender Equality Program. And we are opening this panel as extending our efforts in advancing gender equality business performance. The Global Compact Network Netherlands organizes this online event that will bring together gender equality stakeholders from the Netherlands and the United Nations to explore the business case, the challenges and the opportunities for making gender equality strategies successful in the private sector. The event will consist in two sections. First of all, we will have a panel discussion with UN agencies, UN Women and local networks, and as well a company from the Netherlands implementing gender equality strategies. And then we will follow up with an interview. But I welcome Wineke Haagsma, corporate strategist on sustainability from Pricewaterhouse and a board member of the Global Compact Netherlands. Good morning, Wineke.
Good morning, Amelia, and thank you. I'm really honored to speak today on behalf of the UN Global Compact Advisory Board on such an important topic, gender equality, which is, I think most of you know, SDG 5 in the Sustainability Development Goals Framework. The UN Global Compact aims to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs in private businesses, and therefore setting up programs on topics such as gender equality is part of our activities. And an action on gender equality is needed following the latest calculations. And I often, share this number because for me it's so shocking. Following the latest calculations, we still need over 200 years to close the gender pay gap worldwide. And closer to home, also here in the Netherlands, we have some brutal facts which we are all confronted with, such as over 13% difference in salary and also over 8% difference in labor participation. And only just over 25% of the management positions are currently taken by women. And one of the things not a lot of people know, but also that the land ownership, for example, here in the Netherlands by females is one of the lowest in the world. So there is a lot of action needed. It's an urgent topic, especially because I believe that the gender equality is a critical factor for private businesses to succeed, especially in the long run. So it's really important that we all achieve this gender equality. So I'm really pleased to be part of this morning of this program, and I hand over back to Amelia to go into our panel with such a wide variety and amazing women to share some thoughts. So Amelia, back to you.
Thanks, Julie. Can we see the agenda, please, to guide a little bit the audience? So we will guide this session, as Wineke was mentioning. The gender equality agenda is finally understood as a systemic issue. And how can we move the needle? How can we move the gap that we have from CEOs committing to the women's empowerment principles to the implementation? We will have a very interesting panel discussion with the two UN agencies that represent the United Nations Agency for Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality, UN Women. As well, we will have the United Nations Global Compact that tries to translate the SDG 5 into action. So what are the two frameworks? We are going to talk a little bit with technicalities in order to move this accountability framework about what are the women empowerment principles and what can companies do to this target gender equality program. So as Wineke was mentioning, it's true. It's the gender economic gap. It will take today 268 years to close. And from the thousands of companies who have joined the women empowerment principles, only 2% of these companies are leading the way. So if we are to achieve the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, gender equality must must be changed as a paradigm, not only from diversity and inclusion perspectives, but the SDG 5 talks about the half of the population. And we need to put the private sector in order to put this pillar, because if we are to achieve sustainable development, we are talking as well about 3 important dimensions from the United Nations perspective: from people, from profit and the economy, well-being, the restorative, and the planet. So if half of the population is left behind, and the economy needs to trigger market opportunities to put these ideals of the global goals, and what the private sector can do to expand these ideals and capitalization of the gender dividend, that's why we want to open the panel as well with Margot d'Ancona of Rabobank, and these specialists that will bring perspective of other local networks in order to understand what's happening. We will close with an interview. The pressure that is about the international agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals, and as well, what is the new legislation in the Netherlands? A couple of weeks ago, or 1 month ago, we had the new legislation about the composition of companies, about the gender quotas in corporate boards, and what that will entail for the Dutch society and the Dutch economy to integrate this participation, whether for Dutch companies or international, and what can stakeholders like the Global Compact Netherlands do, or other stakeholders into place to implement this. And then we will close the remarks, hopefully with stronger statements to move into action. In this panel, in this plenary discussion, we are going to talk with Lisa Sundberg. She's the private sector partnerships engager of UN Women. Margot d'Ancona-Rousing, the head of sustainable capital markets of Rabobank, and welcome Melda, the executive director of Global Compact Network Turkey. I would like to expose this issue that we were talking with Wineke about, having this gap of implementation. So business leaders across the globe agree that gender equality is a business priority. And to date, more than 5,000 top executives have committed to the women's empowerment principles, recognizing that advancing gender equality is not only the right thing to do, it's also the good for business. And the research shows that less than 30% of companies have set concrete goals and targets to enable progress to ensure accountability. I would like to ask you, Margot, seeing that perspective, what is the business case for diversity and inclusion in the workplace? And why is the role of the private sector so important in achieving the global goal SDG 5 on gender equality?
Yes, thank you, Amelia, and good to be here. Yeah, maybe a bit of background, because I'm indeed, my name is Margot. I currently work in the sustainable capital markets environment. And before, I was heading the young talent management team within Rabobank. So I made actually a switch from HR to capital markets, which is, I think, especially also for this setting, an interesting perspective, because I actually have 2. So more on the strategy side of Rabobank, as well as on the corporate side. So yeah, I think maybe make it a bit practical, Amelia, because what I actually see in my role as head of sustainable capital markets, we obviously look at financing of companies. And what I actually do is, with my team, is to make sure that we link green or sustainability linked financings to the strategies of the companies. And that's on ESG, so environmental, social, and governmental. So yeah, that touches upon the topic that we discussed today as well. And if I look at all the different companies that we as Rabobank finance, I think I do recognize a bit what you're saying of having 30% now embedded in strategies or corporate strategies in terms of gender equality. Because to give you an example, what we see is companies have certain KPIs that they link to their financing, so key performance indicators. So what we currently see is a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, for example, that's being linked as a target is being set, and that will be assessed every year. And if the company meets the target, then it will get either a discount, but it can also, if the company doesn't meet the target, get a penalty of not meeting the target. And so what we also see is the greenhouse gas emissions is a really popular one for companies to include, but also an option would be to include a KPI for gender equality. So for example, 30% or even 50% women in female leadership positions. And I don't see that often yet. So I think the 30% is around a valid one. On the other hand, I think it's good that we have the discussion with companies, and green loans and ESG is a really important topic at the moment, especially in financing as well. So I do see that picking up, I think, in terms of strategy going forward. So yeah, I think it's a great tool actually to have the discussion with different companies. And I think maybe the other perspective on my end, and that's more on the Rabobank side. We also have that target ourselves. We currently have 44% of women in our managing board, which I think is, well, a bit higher than what you would see in general in terms of women in boards, which is good. But yeah, my goal would be to have it at least 50%, right? We should have the representation of women in society being reflected in our managing board. So that's the ultimate goal. Yeah.
You mentioned something very interesting. So you see a tendency on the new ESG priorities, there's environment, social, and governmental issues that the company is facing, and the prioritization of these sustainability issues linked to financial and non-financial performance, like we do with environment. You see that a link with accountability to move and give a response as a business, a strategic issue for gender equality would be imperative to put the same as for gender equality, to have a compliance to fulfill the law in the rules and regulations in relation to gender.
Exactly.
And do you see it possible, for example, the new legislation, Wineke and Marguerite Soeteman are going to talk very specifically about this issue about accountability, why we are not moving the needle, especially in this Dutch context. How do you see from the capital market perspective? Is there a push from impact investors? Is the investors' agenda pushing companies to comply or to have frameworks in place in relation to diversity and inclusion or gender equality? And if you know, which frameworks would they be using? Are the women empowerment principles known among the shareholders and the stakeholders?
To be honest, I'm not sure if they're yet known, but what is interesting to mention here is that I think especially impact investors, they currently focus a lot on the ESG reporting principles, and gender equality is one of them. As said before, I think the focus still is a lot on the environmental elements of financing, because that's a hot topic now. But I do see a push in the social side as well, being the gender equality strategies. And I think what we see also in terms of, that's more environmental, it's a taxonomy, but you see in the reporting standards, you see a lot of development at the moment in terms of what investors should report on. So this would be definitely one to that will be quite strict as well, I'm sure, yes.
And Elisa, I would like to ask you, as a private sector partnership expert for UN Women, how do you see that the women empowerment, what are the women empowerment principles, and how are any kind of institution organization using the women empowerment principles in order to mainstream gender equality efforts in the private sector? Could you take the lead in this question, please?
Of course, thank you, Amelia. And first, I also want to say I'm super happy to be here and discuss this, of course, very important topic. So the Women's Empowerment Principles, the WEPs in short, they were established by UN Women and the UN Global Compact already back in 2010. So it's a set of 7 principles that offer guidance to companies on how to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, in the marketplace, and in the community. And they really enable companies to evaluate and assess policies and practices and to really identify areas for improvement. So, of course, today's event is focused on the business proposition, right? But I also want to underline what we have touched upon before, that these principles are based on international labor and human rights standards. So there is a clear human rights angle and equality aspect in enabling women to lead, participate, and have access to business opportunities and leadership within the private sector on equal footing as men. And I now will reiterate a bit on what Margot already touched upon, is that we see now a very strong increase in the market, right? That there's this ask for companies that have values that align with gender equality and women's empowerment. So this demand really incentivizes companies to start monitoring and reporting on progress, which the WEPs enables them to do. So transparency and accountability are really key elements of these principles, and they build on this increasing demand from a wide range of stakeholders. So the employees, the consumers, the business partners, and the investors for inclusive and transparent companies. So some might see gender as a social goal, but it actually relates to all levels of the company. So governance, business models, business conduct, and values and intent of the companies. And we see among the WEP signatories that addressing gender equality and women's empowerment as a core business idea has really helped attract and retain talent, particularly women talent, but also attract consumers and investors. And this clear market demand for responsible companies really pushing for this. So on the WEPs, finally, we have, as of today, I checked this morning, 5,658 signatories. And this grows with 100 companies globally every month. So they join this community because we offer them guidance, tools, standard setting, opportunities to participate in strategic dialogues and events, to share learnings, but also really to communicate this commitment to their external and internal stakeholders.
And I would like to ask you, when we see this pattern as well of an increasing ratio of, for example, in the last year, it has been thousands of increase of companies signing from the CEO perspective, engaging the first principle that it's about leadership, how this organization is taking from the leadership, the commitment of the CEO to embark in the implementation of these women empowerment principles. But then we are experiencing as well a gap. Then there is a lot of signature and commitment, but then how do you track the accountability? How do you keep the engagement, even if capacity building is going on? We are going to move later with Melda about the TG, about the implementation, but I would like to ask you, what kind of key principles do you see to engage the CEO to move beyond PR strategies, for example, to sign only the commitment and to really go and to be in connection with other areas of the business like diversity and inclusion, to make it a priority as a business strategy? What kind of principles can engage accountability, the driving of the performance, and to move into implementation efforts? It's a very challenging question, but what do you see as a key principle here?
It's a very challenging question, but I also think this is, the key aspect to address, right? Because we don't want companies to just see diversity and these sustainability issues like an add-on, right? It has to be implemented into the core of the business. So I think it's important to start with the top level, to actually for corporate leaders to signal the importance of gender equality for the company, and they should really initiate and lead this work, and striving to really embed gender equality into the business models and organizational values. But then, this leadership standard setting, right, it should have a trickle down effect. So women and men at all different types of executive levels, but also management levels, really should use their influence to signal that this is important for our corporate success. And they really play this crucial role in setting the corporate agenda and ensuring that gender equality and women's economic empowerment are recognized in policies that define corporate management and oversight. So I think that is one part of it. Then of course we can go into more best practices, but I think this is the most important issue to target right away, to really make sure that these principles and these issues are accounted for throughout the organization, and make sure that you have transparency around your commitment to say, why are we making this? What is our goal? And how will we get there? And really also to target, how do we ensure that we keep on pushing ourselves and keep on reaching further progress?
And what kind of mechanism of accountability and transparency are encompassed with the women empowerment principles? Do companies sign the CEO agreement? And then what is the journey that they go through when the signature occurs? How do you make the link with transparency, and what do they communicate?
I really like that you use the word journey, because that really is what it is. And it's a continuous one with focus on both short-term and long-term commitment to diversity and implementation of sustainable practices. So as you say, the first step is really to then gain awareness of the principles and gain the senior internal support, buy-in among executives and internal stakeholders. So after this initial consideration, you sign, and this is the first key milestone, but this is only really the first one. But here, as I touched upon before, really ensure to have transparency, commitment on why are you actually doing this? And what does it mean for our company to have this sustained implementation of the principles over time? After you sign, is really time to activate your commitment, to self-assess. And here we offer a wide range of tools, including a gender gap analysis tools that you can use to really self-assess your approach to gender equality, identify your gaps, develop action plans with clear performance indicators. Once you become a member, it's really up to you to engage with your team, with your business partners, with your clients and customers, to focus on including gender into value chains and practices. And a clear opportunity that we see here in both communicating and furthering progress, but also to anchor it into your business principles, is to collect gender statistics and gender disaggregated data. And by communicating this progress that you base on data to share experiences and lessons learned from this journey, you really ensure you sustain your company's commitment to these issues. And it also allows you to benchmark over the years, right? And then the final part of this, or not the final part, but one important step also to consider in this journey is the reporting aspect. So accountability and transparency is really the two key elements of making progress. And we really encourage the signatories to report on progress, both internally, externally to your network and stakeholders, but also online through our own web channels, and most importantly, the website, where you have a lot of opportunities to promote such progress.
Thank you. And what we see, for example, in the implementation of the Target Gender Equality Program, the acceleration program of the UN Global Compact that follows the Women Empowerment Principles, we have seen that indeed analyzing the performance, understanding the dimensions on gender equality in these 4 pillars of management, on leadership, on the workplace, on the marketplace and community, helps companies to really understand what is the dimension, the real dimension of gender equality with a specific programs and policies and indicators into my company. How can I translate this situation into my company? And then how can I perform and assess against these benchmarks on my own performance towards the global goal? And that makes it very possible. And this indeed, for example, in the Target Gender Equality Program in the Netherlands, we are seeing an acceleration of companies understanding how to put these principles into practice. And what does that mean? Gender equality, implementation efforts, and accountability. But as well, we see that in order for a company, you have, for example, diversity and inclusion leaders and experts. That is a very cultural component. Of course, you need to escalate this inclusion, but as well from a strategic perspective point of view. I would like to introduce a little bit of questions from Melda, Çele, as an executive director of Global Compact Network Turkey, about what have you seen in real practices from the Global Compact Network from Turkey about in the second edition of implementing the Target Gender Equality Program, from the Women's Empowerment Principles towards the use of the Target Gender Equality Program, having access to expertise on how these capacity building workshops and these implementation efforts can support companies into moving from setting targets into seeing strategies for success of inclusion, etc., into implementing. Could you share your own experience from your network?
Thank you, sure. Thank you for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here. Let me start by giving a bit of background. Turkey has a very vibrant private sector. Last decade, we see that the sustainability agenda is picking up its pace, and more companies are declaring their strategies and commitments to the SDGs. Gender equality is one of the first areas that the companies start their sustainability journey. Turkey ranks second in the world in terms of web signatories. There is a great irony here, though. Although there's great interest in the gender agenda and it's very engaging, Turkey still ranks behind the OECD countries or any other gender-related indices you may think of. It's a very complex issue and it varies across time and location. As the Global Compact Network Turkey, we said how we can help out the companies. And the WEBS was one of the tools that we use. We introduced an implementation guide, which has self-assessment tools, glossaries, good practices in partnership with UN Women and UNFPA Turkey. After the launch of the guide, our members asked on training, how we're going to actually implement this. So we launched the training program for the companies so that they can develop policies and strategies based on WEB's principles. Most of these companies are actually based in Istanbul, but we want to make sure that we are covering all around Turkey. So we carried out the exact work to Izmir and Bursa, both two big cities in Turkey. In terms of the content and the methodology, if I move to TGE, TGE was a game changer for the participants because it's a 10-month-long accelerator program for gender equality at the top management. It has clear guidelines, enables companies to benchmark themselves and their performance, and it has engagement opportunities both locally and globally. Yes, the beauty of it is that you're not locked into your company, but leverage your work using the network effect of UN Global Compact. This is how I'm here. This is how I know that there are some participants from Turkey watching us right now. The whole methodology shows that gender equality is actually achievable, and what hurdles you experience throughout the journey, there are some cures that you can overcome with them. We're in the second term of implementing TG in Turkey. Last year we had 18 companies. This year we have 25 companies. Intuitively, I can say where companies struggle is how they engage the top management, how they plan some of their policies, for example, paternal leave, how they can actually increase the number of applicants to the top management in male-dominant sectors, and how they can ensure preserving this number after some time. So TGE is a 10-month program, as I said, and it gives exact clear guidelines on how you can actually solve these problems. There is a long way in front of us, and there's much to do in the private sector, I know, but this methodology and with the willingness of the companies is showing that it's actually achievable, and TG's numbers are they're a solid example of that. I'll just give you a few of them. At the global level, 83% of the companies are actually setting their targets or revising them of women's representation in the top management, and 67% of these companies at the board level. So, and gender gap analysis tool, which helps companies benchmark themselves, is a great tool where they can see where they are, and then they can see where they have to be in the coming years. This is how I see how we see the TG works on the ground. But just lastly, there's a great challenge in front of us as well as the local networks, because we need to scale this movement, and we need to make it fast. Right now in Turkey, only 43 companies join TGE, and 235 companies are signed, are a Global Compact Turkey member. We have to join our forces, collaborate more, and make sure that we allocate our resources wisely for gender equality.
Thank you, Melda. Indeed, this year, the UN Global Compact is being running the 2nd edition. And indeed, last year, in the first opening of the TG edition was run in 19 countries. And in the 2nd edition, there has been an acceleration as well, not only for members, but local networks pushing for the gender equality agenda. And in 1 year now, it's been run in 44 countries. So that might have an influence on also on running the TG program and in the implementation of the Women Empowerment Principles. So also these thousands of companies coming to join the signature and embarking the CEO as a business and strategic issue on gender equality matters. I'm going to take some questions of the panel. And there are, for example, for Lisa or Melda, there's a question saying, if countries do not pressure the private sector on closing the gender gap, are there tools and practices you use to convince companies to join this network and engage in closing the gender gap? If this is possible, who would like to take the question? Melda or Lisa?
I can start, if that's okay. I think it's important to underline to companies that there's, I think there's 3 aspects to this, right? So it's, of course, the talent aspect of it. More diverse companies actually perform better. And this is, I think, an argument that many have heard before, but it's important to still underline this, that, companies that reflect the market setup where they are operating actually have a better understanding of what the market needs. And then you can also look at the innovation aspect of this. Diverse team come up with more diverse solutions as well. But then I think we touched on this before, and I know Margot said something on this as well, is that the market is really asking for diverse companies. So there is an increasing demand from stakeholders to engage with, business partners that have clear tools and resources and practices in place to work on these issues. And this we see from the WEPS network, that actually we're getting a lot of requests from investors on how can we use the WEPS as this tool for understanding who we invest in. What practices do they have in place that actually benefit women? So I think there's also this aspect of understanding that you actually become more attractive to your market by closing the gender gap. I can elaborate on this, I think, quite a lot, but maybe over to Melda.
Yeah, I'll just add something from the ground in Turkey. The financial sector's role, I think, is very crucial here. They are the ones who can make this change actually a bit faster. So in the ground, once we engage the banks or the credit loaners, let's say, the company started calling us, and they say how we can actually make our policies better, not on the ground, because the companies the banks are not asking if they have signed the WEPS. They are asking whether they have their policies or strategies intact. That's why the companies come to us, and they want something beyond WEPS, where they commit. They want to see how they're actually going to make sure they have their strategies intact. And TGE and WEPS tools are perfect for them.
So in that direction was also what Margot was mentioning with Rabobank, that beyond TG, beyond the women empowerment principles, there is a sense of accountability of the imperatives of environmental, social, and governance aspects that is calling to be accountable to gender issues, or diversity and inclusion issues in a broader aspect. Margot, would you like to add something in your perspective about this engagement?
Yeah, it's actually I'm definitely triggered by this discussion, because I think from a financial perspective and as a lender for different type of companies, I do recognize that it's really important to have the conversation at the moment with the clients. But if I look in practice, what you see is a bit of reluctance to for example, to include the KPI on gender equality. And to give a bit of a background, we find a lot of sectors, obviously, and I think all banks do that. And what you do see is that in some sectors, it's more embedded already to have a diversity strategy, to have it as a target, to report on it already. So it's quite easy actually to include such a KPI in your financing, that you commit to the target. On the other hand, you see also a lot of companies, and for example, mostly in a technical environment or in the offshore environment, you see them struggling with meeting these targets while they believe it's important, but in practice try to find women, for example, on in wind energy on sea, or so to say. So I do understand that companies they are transitioning, but in some sectors it's also difficult to really set strict targets on gender equality still. So that's also a bit of the devil's advocate here on terms of, yes, we should discuss it with companies, definitely. And I think in leadership positions, it's more easy to already do it than sometimes in the more practical environments. But I just checked the numbers on KPIs. If you look at the deviation on, for example, having greenhouse gas emissions, a KPI in your financing versus women empowerment, or the diversity in employees, you see currently around 60% on KPIs in the financing on greenhouse gas emissions. For example, you see 10% in KPIs in renewable energy, and you see about 8% in, it's actually the third one that's being included in financing now. So that's, I think for this panel, this discussion is really good that it's the third one. And in general, in general, we see 3 KPIs being included in financing. So that's, I think in terms of data, that's a nice number to mention here. Yeah.
Yeah, although yet low, but it's interesting to see that it start to appear in the financial performance. So that can really make a difference. Yeah, it's interesting to see how the market opportunities will move the sustainability agenda and call for accountability, although it's a human rights issue, but yeah, it triggers this level of accountability. We have a question that maybe for Lisa is, for example, it's about masculinities. Do you consider exploring positive masculinity frameworks? Could you increase the men engagement at the highest levels of the management in issues related to gender equality? And I think that related to that question as well is that, would you share like some resource information on positive masculinity frameworks, if you are aware about these frameworks?
I think this is really such an important question too, because what we really need to address, I mean, the norms that hinder women to excel within the private sector, right? They actually affect men as well. But, you know, so the norms that's, for example, constitute who can be a leader and the profile and the qualities of what that leader should really possess, they say something, you know, on, you know, when we think about a leader, we think about someone that is assertive and masculine, or, you know, the qualities that we also connect with masculinities. But it's important to actually target these norms to say a leader can be many things. And there are many qualities that we now, you know, put into this binary idea of masculinities and femininities that needs to be, you know, we need to remove these ideas to be able to ensure that everyone can participate within the private sector. So here men have a key role to play, right? And you can look at so many different norms that affect masculinities that you can, as a man, can address. For example, the norms that surround the unpaid care work and home responsibilities, where we see continuous uneven distribution of unpaid care work, where women continue to do the larger one. And just last week, I read some new research that actually shows women stop in their career track 2 to 3 years before a point where they see themselves having kids to prepare for going on maternity leave. And this pattern is not at all reflected in men, but it's this idea that women should prepare for having kids by actually not excelling in the company, because then they wouldn't be able to you know, juggle the home care responsibilities with the responsibilities at work. So I think we have to use positive masculinity frameworks to address these norms. And it's, you know, a male leader can really set an incentive for the company by leading by example. For example, going on paternity leave, implementing parental care practices that are equal for both men and women. So I think this is really something that male leaders can take the lead on. And there are several resources through the WEPS network that I can share these over maybe a follow-up email later, but that actually help you to understand how to target equal practices within the workplace, right? And to help you see what are our gender bias discrimination in our practices and see how you can overcome these.
That's very interesting. I'm going to join, whether it's Lisa or maybe Melda this time. We have a couple of questions about the women empowerment principles. There is a question, what is the platform from the UN Women Empowerment Principles signatories to share about their progress and best practices? Do the UN Women Empowerment Principles have a specific branding, visual assets the signatories can use to communicate progress? And linked to that same question, sorry, yeah, there is a question here. Can public entities also join the Women Empowerment Principles? And what would be the difference to consider for public service organizations compared to corporates? Melda or Lisa, I think Melda, you can go with it, but maybe Lisa, if you can support this question.
Okay, I think I'll need Lisa's support in some of the questions, but I'll do my best. Okay, all the information is my colleague is right now posting on the chat. You can have it there. But public sector cannot join. It's open to companies only, private companies only. And in terms of best practices, the platform offers some best practices, but at the local level, every local network has some kind of a platform or a guidebook, or in our case, our guidelines, where the best practices are shared. Also, the working groups at the local networks is a great platform where they can peer learn together. Not only the good practices, but also the unlucky ones, let's say, and how they can overcome those experiences. That's also very good learning for the companies. That's how we operate in Turkey. But Elisa, please support me in answering this question. Thank you.
We are at 3-4 minutes to close the panel and to open the interview session. I'm going to take one question because I think it's very interesting. The DG has been addressing in the last 2 years 2 pillars of impact in gender, that is the leadership and then the workplace. But there are many areas of impact as well that are included in the Women Empowerment Principles framework. It's about the marketplace and the community through corporate social responsibility policies and programming. And there is a very interesting question here. During a recent Equalib event, we discussed about how gender lens procurement and supply chain can also accelerate the journey in terms of improving accountability of leaders. One of the key suggestions that there, if public procurement will anchor this as must close for the public spend, private industries would own more to show progress in gender equality. The question, what's the view of panelists on that one? How regulation can help us more in the way and what beyond the UN approach here? So it's about the supply chain. How can we expand? How can we mainstream gender equality opportunities through the supply chain? And in that sense, I don't have a clear answer, but for example, Unilever, in that sense, in order, for example, to recover the markets during the pandemic, has made a huge investment on the wage gap. But here, in this question is related to inclusive procurement strategies in order to really empower the supply chain made of lots of female entrepreneurs. Maybe Melda, you would like to take this one in order to go into the marketplace impact.
Sure, I think there's a great potential here, especially with the MNCs. They are, like the financial sector, are the game changers and key actors of the private sector. There are good examples. Unilever Turkey is one of them. In Turkey, they establish a platform with their major suppliers, and they ask them to join them in women's empowerment principles. And they're actually kind of created a platform, a learning platform for their suppliers to move them from one place to another. They're the agents of the UN Global Compact Turkey here, I might say, because they're the agents of changing their supply chains. They're asking them to give their targets to Unilever Turkey. And once they started asking for those and set the targets with them, I think the whole supply chain affects from this process. I just wanted to give you an example from the field, and I think many of the MNCs can actually take this example and replicate in their supply chains.
Thank you. And closing the panel, there are questions here. We are going to send the recording and also as well materials to recap. There is a vast information that has been shared in frameworks and technicalities. And I would like to pass to the next level to open the panel for the to open the next level of the event for the interview. Please, Julie, can you put the slide? Welcome, Wineke, and welcome, Marguerite. I leave the stage to you both.
Thank you so much, Amelia, and also all the panelists, and of course, a warm welcome to Marguerite. I think it's a true honor to speak to you this morning, because you're next to the CEO of Aon Holdings, also CMO Aon Inpoint, and also chair of the board of advisors SER Topvrouwen, global alumni, Harvard Business School, and several more executive roles. Most important, a strong advocate for gender equality, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really happy and a warm welcome to you. Before we go over to our interview, I would like to encourage also in behalf of Marguerite, everyone to use the opportunity to ask questions in the chat, and we will take the time to also ask your questions to Marguerite during this interview. So please type all your questions in the chat. Marguerite, just listening to the panel just now, is there anything in particular you would like to reflect on? And I'm also curious, maybe before going into that reflection, what is your personal relationship or experience with gender equality? Why is it so important to you?
Well, my first reflection is that following the discussion and the panel, I think that it's really important to set uniform goals and standards, because I think too often we talk about goals and definitions, but you have to imagine different stakeholders have different terminology and different goals and cultures, etc. So it's important to define success and failure in uniform standardized terms. We often think that our success is also other people's success, but that can differ. So this is one I would like to share with everyone, that you realize that this is something which is important to make sure that you really are talking the same language, have the same KPIs, have the same also cultural changes at the forefront. Yeah, and back to my own purpose why I'm doing this. So sometimes, Wineke, people ask me, because I'm so busy with diversity, like, Marguerite, how do you do your job?
How do you manage?
For Aon? Yeah, and the funny part is that, so I said, I don't have a job, I have a mission. That's, I was discussing this morning with my husband, because I said, like, when I get the question, how do you job? I don't have a job, I have a mission. I think that it's very important to know that women are, 50% of the world's population, that across the globe, we now see that a lot of women, more women than men, graduate from universities, higher education, etc., and applied sciences schools. And then it's in time that we use the potential of those women also for the economy, not only for society, because that's something doing good for society is not only looking at climate change, ESG, but also looking at, including women in the workforce and including women in society. But also, if you take a look at the economic uplift, there have been multiple reports of McKinsey, and I can call those numbers out, you're familiar with as well, 28 trillion if we would use the potential of women across the globe for our global GDP. But also, a Bank of America recent research showed that women, if we use the potential of women also in boards, which is shown in some instances already, and that's something Bank of America research showed, then, you know, there's a 20% more profitable and sustainable policy applied in boards, so more effective and balanced decision-making, so good for corporate governance. But also, and I'm of course in the world of risk, so let me put that together as well. It's noted that the board is taking the risk management of the company is better managed as well. So apparently Bank of America research showed that 30% less risk is applied in those companies. So that's better risk mitigation, you know, by prevention. So you can of course ensure everything you want through Aon. I'm definitely inviting everybody to do so, but without the jokes aside, it's important to know that if you have a diverse team in the top of your board and the subtop, you actually have a better balanced decision making, which is good for business and good for the economy and good for society.
Yeah. So the value creation as a company really increases by diversity. And one of the things which was really triggering in my mind was also what Lisa was saying, the innovation part. So you have the risk part and also the opportunity part, of course, that with several lenses, of course, you have a more diverse team, more lenses, and so more innovation. And
back to research also, someone mentioned impact investing, ESG investing. And it's interesting to see that 64% of women are seriously considering this in their decision making, while so men less. And 96% of the men are actually focused on income. So very much focused on revenue, and less focused
short-term revenue.
Yeah, and so
mostly short-term revenue. Yeah,
exactly. So back to long-term value creation, indeed, fully support what you just said.
Yeah. So I think you're rightly saying, like, the standardization and also the legislation is an important step to accelerate the impact. And I was wondering, because the Senate approved a bill to maintain a quota for the number of women, right at the top of the business world. What opportunities will this new Dutch legislation bring to the advancement of gender equalities for companies in your view?
For everybody, there's quite an international audience in this call today, so I'll try to give a short summary of what's happened in the Netherlands, but also relate to international standards and international developments as well. So first and foremost, the Netherlands, we had our voting rights in 1990. Just to give you some background on the Netherlands, we had an emancipist called Aletta Jacobs. She was really getting voting rights for women already in 1919, so over 100 years ago. So you think, wow, the Netherlands, you know, because we were ahead. Just as comparison in Switzerland, it was only happening in 1971. So we were ahead of the music. But now it starts getting interested. Somehow in the Netherlands, you can see that the conservatism, which does prevail in society, has ensured that if you take a look at the position of women, and especially in boards, that we didn't get where we wanted to be. So we had some laws in the past, but didn't have real effect. So in 2019, our Social Economic Council provides advice to our government, actually provided an advice which was aiming to accelerate diversity and inclusion, especially at top level. And the interesting things were that people had said in the past, there are not enough women who are eligible for boards, they're not visible. And so for a number of years, one of my activities, Ser Topvrouwen, has been aiming to make sure that those women are visible, that they are in a database, that it's known that they're there, etc., etc. Now, the law which you just referred to was indeed accepted by our Senate only 6 weeks ago. What does it imply? It's quite interesting because it's implying that there is a quotum. Yeah, some of you know that there are already quotum in place in France and, you know, in other countries, Italy, for women on boards. In the Netherlands, the quotum will be applicable as from the 1st of January. 33% minimum of women on supervisory boards of our listed companies, that are approximately 100 listed companies. And the second part of that law is that all the 5,000 companies following those 100 listed companies, so that are companies which have over 250 employees and over 40 million of revenue, need to actually report going forward on what they're doing on diversity and inclusion, and need to report the numbers on their boards, on the subtop, and need to report this annually. And in a recent quick scan, which we did, it became apparent that while out of 10 were companies familiar with the law, only 25%, only 17% had started. So that's really a lot. You know, people were familiar with the quotum. The funny part was, Wineke, to share this with you, that so the listed companies are already working on it. and they know it, so they are familiar with it and they're working on it. They were not so yet familiar with the fact they also need to report subtop, etc. So that's something which was interesting. But now the funny part became that 25% of the following 5,000 companies, I thought this was quite funny actually, 25% of the 5,000 companies thought that the quota was also applicable to them, which I think is a good thing because it makes people aware of the fact they need to work, but still, of course, it's not applicable to them, it's only applicable to the listed companies. Now back to the impact of quota. You've just discussed also gender pay gap, etc. in the previous discussion. The interesting part is that all measures have to do with each other. And I would like to point out the Italian example. So in Italy, they've had the quota rosa, it's called, already for some years. They recently increased the level of women on boards from 30% to 40%. And it's interesting that now I'm going to link something with this, that in Italy, the gender pay gap of women is the lowest in Europe. So they've had the quota for years. And on the board level, the gender pay gap of women is the lowest in Europe, in Italy. So you can see that all the various, across the globe, all the various things are interconnected with each other to some extent. And so it's very important to fine tune all those different buttons at the radio station. That's old-fashioned. We don't have a radio station anymore, radio transmitter, but it's important to actually fine tune all those buttons.
Yeah, and therefore it's also important to have a comprehensive approach to your implementation, right? Because it's also interlinked, or everything is so interlinked. And I'm wondering from your perspective, I mean, even if it's not mandatory, and I think most of the companies also SMEs and are implementing, luckily, gender equality plans and activities and visions. What is the key challenge in a comprehensive approach, or what would be, in your mind, the key thing to not to forget in your implementation?
So I think that everybody is in the meantime familiar to actually report on KPIs, and numbers are easy. But what's notable now is that the qualifications, how do you describe a change? How do you actually apply a change in the culture of your organization? What does it include? And it's important to make sure that every colleague in your organization, that he or she is able to, or if you're if you're enabled to perform to the best of your abilities. And only when you can be your true self, and so that you don't leave anything behind when you enter the door of your company every morning, if you go into the office, or when you open your computer, that you have to leave something behind, because you feel that you're not allowed to be your true self here in your company. So it's important to make sure that everybody feels at home in your company with his or her or ex, how he or she, etc. is. And this is something which implies that companies need not only to look at the numbers, but also need to look at how do we allow people to be their true selves. And often this analogy is used, and all of you will know this, but I've added something to it, so stay with me. So, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance. But equity, and that's the one I would like to add, is actually being invited to dance on the music you like, but you feel comfortable with. And that's more and more important. And it requires company to change the language. It requires company to change, for example, tangible discussion point is, if you have a company with with 3 generations, it requires different approaches to the 3 different generations. So there is, of course, age is also playing an issue in companies at the moment. If you take a look at ethnic backgrounds, if you have colleagues with a Christian background, they might like different holidays than colleagues with a Muslim background. And they like to celebrate their what we call it suikerfeest. I'm not sure the sugar, when they have the end of the Ramadan. And those kind of understandings allow companies to better perform and to be more inclusive to their employees.
Yeah, and I recognize that personally that recently, a few weeks ago, there was a disagreement during a meeting, and you see very often, it's also psychology, right? That people get discomfort out of disagreements. But I was reflecting on this with my team member thereafter, and I was saying, well, actually, this other colleague of us had a different opinion, and that's actually an opportunity to grow. So welcome it instead of, you know, like pushing it away, a disagreement, because I think that all the different lenses and that everyone can be themselves with their own opinion makes it stronger, right?
Yeah. I think diversity of thought and opinion is what you relate to is very important. It's not always easy. So there was an interview with some two ladies in the Netherlands who was also, one of them is also on our parliament. And they wrote a book about how inclusive and cultural diversity is being applied in the company, in the workplace. And it's tough because it does require sometimes also having tough conversations. It requires also, and I think this is really important, it's really tough because you now see that there are words which are no longer accepted or which have said that that's an old-fashioned word and you shouldn't use it to this extent. I say always, you know, try before you engage in a discussion or a conversation on topics like cultural diversity, engage with each other and say, okay, there's positive intent in this room. And so that if people coincidentally say something maybe which is not the right word, it doesn't make a difference. There's positive intent, there's a common goal to get things going. And back to diversity and thought opinion, also back if you realize that this is also the case in your team when you discuss something and have a different thought or different opinion, that you agree, you disagree. And it's about respect. And this is also back to trust in the team. So if you talk about leadership skills, this is as a leader, how do you engage your team to have trust in you and to have trust in each other?
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful said, the trust in good intention on the other side always, right? So it's we have seen lately, Marguerite, a lot of companies signing statements, joining coalitions. Is that like a hopeful thing? Is that a good sign? How do you perceive that?
So I've seen a number of companies. So when we did this pre-briefing, I think it's interesting. We compared some notes on companies who signed up for the Women's Empower Principles of the United Nations and also signed up for charters in the Netherlands, etc., etc. And I know that some of them are not delivering the promise they've made. And I do think that we need to call them out. I think, by the way, so back to the business case of diversity and inclusion. So, you know, we know that there is an economic case, you know, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, all done of research. It's more profitable, more sustainable, more creative, more innovative, etc. We know that there's a social case. Half of the population is female. We know there is a legal case, and I'm getting to the point here as well, because if you don't do, you know, the reputation of your company is at stake. You won't get the talent because talent is scarce. And you might be faced with lawsuits. So I think that I would like to call this out next to the moral case where I think, you know, in our constitution, there's equal treatment, equal opportunity for everyone. You know, let's make sure we live up to it. But back to the legal case, I think that you need to be extremely cautious because you do see that if you deliberately sign up to things, which some people have done, if you deliberately sign up to some principles and don't comply with it, I think at some end, people will hold you accountable and might even hold you legally, sue you for the things you have promised to do and didn't do. Because you can then be stated like, hey, you knew that this was something you should attach and you didn't know how to do it. Now, what's interesting is to also give, so I think that I'm in favor of naming the very good people who are doing this. So that the law in the Netherlands will actually imply that we will start measuring and benchmarking. That's done by the SER. So while I'm an advisory person, I'm not sure how they will start reporting on it. Nevertheless, be aware that in Australia, this has already happened. And in Australia, it's the same like we're going to do in the Netherlands. It's publicly reported. There's a public report and a private report. The public report will be made publicly available. The private report is just for the company itself. But in the public report, there will also be benchmarks versus other companies. And in the future, talent is scarce, you know, millennials and Gen Z, et cetera, will only want to work with companies who mirror society. So it's a reputational risk, a legal risk. And I think, you know, if you want to make sure that your company is still there for the next 50 years, you need to, you know, back to long-term value creation. This is something you need to address.
Yeah. Also, considering the fact that there are many, I think, international audience, there's today, this morning, so I don't want to like only focus on the Dutch government and its role, but what is in general said, like the role of governments moving forward? Do you have some some examples of what they could do as next steps to take their responsibilities as governments.
Now, yeah, I think it's important to relate that more and more is being seen that governments, the private and public sector need to cooperate, also together with NGOs like ourselves. So also Bill Gates, just to relate on something which came out today, Bill Gates just today released his observations following COP26. He made 3 observations. One is that, you know, we need clean energy and that innovation is really happening there and that it's a positive. The second was that climate adaptation, you know, something we need to look more visible, adapt. But the third one, that's why I'm calling it out here, is that he also is positive, and I'm as well, about more profound private sector and public sector and NGO cooperation and collaboration. And we've seen also at the Women Empowerment that this is happening. And as you know, Wineke, I was representing the Netherlands at the G20 this year for women empowerment. And at the G20, we saw that G20 Empower is a cooperation between private sector and public sector. So I was representing the Netherlands private sector, now Minister of Education representing the public sector. And we had many representatives from around the globe from the G20, but also from Turkey. So to our Turkish friends, Kadijer was represented very, very well. And interestingly, what you see when you work together, within a very short period of time, you can actually create tangible traction. So why do I mention this? Because in the end declaration of the G20 Rome Leaders Summit 2 weeks ago, 1.5 weeks ago, for the first time in the history of the G20, women empowerment and gender equality and diversity has been included in paragraph 33 and paragraph 34. And that's because you cooperate, you put best practices playbooks together, you make it clear that this is something which is on top of mind of the whole world, not only in society, but also in corporate life. And so that's a very nice best practice of how you can make it work. It's still a lot of work in progress, because at the end of the day, you need together to continue the momentum. It's one thing to get something included in the declaration, but it's 2 to make it happen and to act on it accordingly. But it will only happen if you support each other and create, you know, a common ground of understanding each other.
Yeah, I would like to encourage also, because we have 5 minutes left for this interview, the audience, which I think is carefully listening. But please, if you still have questions, put them in the chat so we can ask them to Marguerite. I have plenty more questions. So, but because you're talking about, you know, that this common ground and also everyone taking his responsibility, and I also really like always to make the question back like to everyone's individual responsibility, right? Because I think eventually governments and private sector businesses, at the end it comes to private or individual examples. So what would you say to, there are a lot of young people also listening today, young professionals entering the market. What can they do personally to contribute to this topic?
Now, first and foremost, you know, I think that all the youngsters on the call, they all will start working for companies who, in their opinion, will mirror society and their values. So that's the first and foremost remark I'll make. I think they have a choice to make, to work for a company where they see what they can be. And so where they see the right role models at the right levels in the organization. So that's the first and foremost thing. Second, I think if you're already in an organization and you feel that there are certain situations which you should address, I think you should address them. So have the courage to address situations which you think should be different. Do it in a respectful and engaging manner, but do address them. And back to all of us who are already there at certain points of position in companies and firms, I think it's important to realize that, you know, that results of the past will not guarantee results of the future. So we need to adapt to change. We need to have not only the intellectual capacity to take a look what's going on in the world, the emotional capacity to understand what's going on, but also the adaptability to adapt our behaviors and our own thought process, and the learning ability and the listening capability to change. And that requires leaders also my age, I'm 55, I dare to disclose there, you know, to be open-minded for anyone else with a different opinion. And it's tough, it's not easy. And I also don't like to be opposed of challenge or everything, but it is necessary now in a world which is, and then back to one word, it's called ESG, and we all know what it stands for, environmental social governance. If you then talk about your own personal way you can influence the environmental social governance discussion, The S of social includes diversity. And it's so easy because it's something you can influence now. If you're a leader in a company, you can make that change now. You can say, okay, this is it. I'm going to take a look at the numbers. I'm going to take a look at the culture. I'm going to take a look at people feel comfortable. It's the easiest one as a leader to solve now. On environment, we need governments to step in. Everybody, you've just been at COP26. And on risk management, on governance, yeah, so there are risks you can mitigate and manage. But with COVID-19, we've seen also that there are also some known unknowns or unknown unknowns, which are difficult to manage.
Yeah.
So you can be the change.
Yeah, and use your voice. That's what I hear also in your reply, Marguerite. We have a question in the chat, so I will read it for you. It's from Elif. Thanks, Marguerite, for your strong leadership on gender equality. According to McKinsey 2021 Women in Workplace, compared with men at their level, women leaders are up to twice as likely to spend substantial time on DEI work that falls outside their formal job responsibilities. It's a long question, sorry. Or it's a bit of context first. That's a bit unfortunate truth because we need more men allies to shift the paradigm. And I think so simply because they are still holding more roles in the governance. I think this is a critical question. So what is how to use the power of influence from men, and how can we create stronger?
I love the question. Thank you. So not only change the women, but change the system. That's what it implies. But I'm going to give you some background. I was last week in Lausanne for a CEO roundtable, and I was there with 70 CEOs. Regrettably, only 10 female CEOs, but anyhow, there were 10 female CEOs. Also, companies like IMD, Instelt, Harvard Business School try to change the composition of their roundtables when they have CEOs present. We discussed diversity and inclusion. I can tell you this, ladies, the men have great challenges with this point, with this topic, because it's very scary. They don't want to do wrong, but they don't know yet how to do good. So they need to be helped. And so I think it's important that if you understand that you have a leader in your firm who tries to do good for the firm and tries to change it, try to help them. So back to D&I that ladies support. We need people together to work together to discuss the elephants in the room and in the China room even. But it's important if you have the good intentions, raise out. And listen, it's not a job, it's a mission to try and to make the world, gender equal and to get a better cultural diversity and ethnic minorities and other minorities in companies included. And so I do like the question because this is a parochial discussion today amongst all of us are primary intrinsically motivated to make the change. What is important to also understand, some people are not intrinsically primarily motivated, but will be willing to make the change or should make the change. So take them along and accept that their primary reason was not as we have it, but their secondary reason that at the end of the day, we all have the same motivation to make that change happen. So do take the man along, engage with them, talk with them. Try to do also mixed when you organize events, make them mixed. Don't do only, you can do only women, of course, also, but engage with men because then you also engage not only on the topic of D&I, but on the content of why you're in that job, why you work for that company, what your mission is, how you can long-term create value, etc., etc. So
I think it's an important message to close up with. Be inclusive ourselves as well, right? And you've also emphasized the need for collaboration, public-private, and also the KPIs and the reporting and the targets, and many other things among culture changes, etc. But especially before I hand over to Amelia to close up the meeting, because unfortunately we are running out of time. But I absolutely loved it to hear like you're not having a job, but you're on a mission, and let's go on that mission collaboratively. And the advice to everyone to dance on their own music.
Can I say what? Can I make one remark, Wineke, for everyone on the call? Yes. So take a look at my LinkedIn post of today. So please join me at LinkedIn and connect with me at LinkedIn. Because I posted something today which was about COP26, and I did something completely out of the box. So it requires you from time to time to go outside your comfort zone and do something where people might think, huh, what you doing now? Just take a look. So you'll see, and it my post today about COP26. I posted a little guy who once asked a question in a television animated series. I'm not sure whether you viewer recognizes. Can we fix it? Yes, we can. And so why do I mention this to all of you? So you need to step out of your comfort zone from time to time to make that change. Be aware of it. Don't be afraid. Be bold, be brave, be brilliant, and we'll make it happen. So thank you very much, Wineke, for the opportunity to
I really admire what you're doing, Marguerite. So thank you for your insights, and it was really a pleasure to talk to you. And hopefully we will talk much more in the future. I see that Amelia is also already so kind to share the link of your LinkedIn post in the chat, so everyone can find it. Thank you, Marguerite, and over to you, Amelia.
Well, it has been an incredible interview. Thank you so much, Marguerite, for opening these international agendas, but especially what an inspirational mission, what a journey. Yes, indeed, it's a call. It's a collective call to transform a system that doesn't work for half of the population, and solutions need to come from the purpose of individuals, of companies to align, to walk the talk. And then companies beware that not walking the talk today can take a risk legally and especially in your reputation if you want to deliver for the people in the countries you are operating in. Thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure.